Hey, hi, my name is Brian Goodwin. I'm the Middlebury College Division III water polo coach for a club. I do the men in the fall and the women in the spring. Believe it or not, I've done it since 1999. Uh, it's a hobby for me. I have my own business, and that allows me to drive down to Middlebury for practices and attend games and tournaments. So my background is I played and coached in Canada at the varsity level. I was lucky enough to have three outstanding coaches since when I started playing water polo at the age of 13. So I've been doing it for a long time. And from a coaching standpoint, I'm constantly getting better. Um, if you ask some of my players from 20 years ago what I was doing well and what I could work on, I've worked on a lot of those things. So I'm going to start about how I organize practices, what's involved. And before I start actually about the practices, a couple things you have to consider before you even get in the water is the number of practices you want to have per week. I'm lucky enough to have four, and um, that works. Uh, I'm also going to focus on just the men's season. The women's season, the practices are similar. The big difference is that the women's season is much longer. So you can certainly work on it, have a different plan than during the men's season. The men's season is really a sprint. So that has some limitations. And as I said, so figure out how many practices you want to have a week, and then we'll work backwards from there. The next thing that you want to consider is the length of your practices. Um, I think a 2-hour practice is ideal. Believe it or not, those 2 hours go very, very quick if you're organized. I think that once you get the players to the pool, if it's only an hour, they're sort of in and out before you, and it's not their best use of time. An hour and a half could work. I like the 2-hour setup, so that's what we try to focus on. Another big thing to consider before you even get started is the number of players you have. If you are from a small school and you have 10 players, which is considered a small team, and those 10 players are going to practices on a regular basis, some things it's good. You can do a lot of drills with individual things. Some things it's not so good. It's hard to do extra man and scrimmage when you only have 10 players on your team. So it's important to know that before you actually get started. Now, on the flip side of that, if you have 20 players or 20 or more players, that makes it difficult because you're limited with pool space, and it's hard to get everybody involved doing all those drills and different things when you have that many players. So really, an ideal team is anywhere between 14 and 17 players. That's assuming all those players come to practice. If you have 23 people on your roster, but only 15 or 16 are coming to practice, then that's a good number. So anytime you have a practice that's between 12 and 15 players, you got a solid group. So that's something to strive for. The other thing that you got to consider, and this is really important, is your team an experienced team or an inexperienced team? From my experience at Middlebury, I'm all over the place. Sometimes I'll have, in years past, I've had, a group of 12 really, really solid players when they get there. A lot of times now I'll have 2 or 3 experienced players who played in high school, and then I might have 6 or 7 who played a little bit or are just starting, or they came from a swimming background. So that's really important in how you run your practices based on the experience level of your team. And I'll get into that in a couple of minutes. Let me start with what I consider a real important goal as your team is you want to be playing your best water polo at your championship. Okay, so in the men's season, it's very short. The first tournament you play, you might only have 6 or 7 practices under your belt. Hard to have expectations of how your team's going to perform with only 6 or 7 workouts. Hopefully, by the time you get to championships, you might be closer to 20 workouts, for example. In that 20 workouts, if you do 2 hours of practice, hopefully you can accomplish some things and get better as a group. So I try to say to our team that first weekend, everyone's sort of in the same boat. Like we're playing 4 games this Saturday and Sunday, and the teams that we're playing, they haven't had very many practices either. So it really is, you got to break it up into sections. Okay, so let's talk about what I do to have my practices as well organized as I can. If you can see this, I got a book that I write every single workout down in that book. Okay, so that does a couple of things. I show up organized, ready to go. I'm not spending time thinking about what I'm going to do, wasting time for what I'm going to do. It also shows my team that I'm organized, I'm structured, I'm ready to go. Okay. What it also does is I have books for every year. I can go back 20 years and look at drills I might have forgot or things that haven't used that in a while. But the big thing that it allows you to do is, let's say the first tournament happens and you're playing your 6-on-5 extra man is awful. Okay. So you can go back in your book and say, I've only worked on this like maybe twice in the last 3 weeks. So how could we have high expectations to do something well when we haven't really put the time in? So then I can make adjustments. The other thing that book works well is, let's say you have your first tournament and you find out that your passing isn't very good. Then you can put more passing into your practice plan. Okay. Make sense so far? Okay. So what do I write in my book? How do I get organized it? It's pretty simple. I have a general warm-up. I'm a big believer in doing water polo skills in all areas. If you want to be on a swim team, you join a swim team. So everything I do has some sort of structure geared towards water polo. I generally do a warm-up that starts as soon as practice starts. If people want to do stretching, I encourage them to get there early and do it before we actually get in. Sometimes it's difficult when you have people coming from class late and having to jump in and partially through practice, but you try to make the best of it. So if I look in my book for what I did yesterday or today, I can see I generally do like a 300 warm-up. That's to get people moving. And I do very little of just front crawl. I'll incorporate whether it's water polo backstroke or stop starts or rollover or a variety of things right away into the warm-up. Okay? I don't do swim at 300 it gets slow, people get bored. I try to incorporate 4 or 5 different drills in that 300 every day. Okay. After you do it a couple times, you don't have to repeat it. If I say we're doing 100 front crawl, 100 rollover, 100 stop starts, the players know exactly what I'm talking about, and we don't have to waste time explaining it to everybody again. Okay. I usually then do some sort of kicking, whether it's a flutter kick and then half a length flutter kick, half a length dribbling with the ball, or I do half a kick or 1 length flutter, 1 length breast, 1 length egg beater, and I rotate it. But I try to change it up fairly regularly so the practices move along quickly and you don't have to explain everything you're doing. Okay. So I like to do a bit of kicking. It's, you're warming up your body, and I think that's important to not just work on your, I don't do a lot of butterfly and warm up. I don't do a lot of breaststroke. I try to focus towards front crawl, head up front crawl, roll over, doing water polo backstroke. Okay. So after I do some, a warm up and some kicking, I then get into bringing the balls in right away. Okay. Even with the kicking, they might do 100 half the length flutter kick, half the length dribbling with the balls. Okay. So the balls are in the pool a lot. So what I'll maybe then do is I'll do some simple ball handling, whether they're swimming side by side, doing 100, passing between each other while they're swimming. I might do some walking and passing, and then I'll do some leg work drills after that. So with the men's season, it's hard to see huge improvement doing leg work drills in a 6-week season. So a lot of times I'm thinking about year 2, year 3, year 4 in their water polo career, but we still try to do a fair amount of leg work. I'm not going to, I make them short, maybe 100. Okay. I do a lot of things in short groups so that they're not, if you're playing varsity water polo, you might do 200 of one certain leg work drill. You don't have time, and it gets a little boring. The players lose interest. So I try to do most of my leg work drills in either hundreds or 50s. I usually do 3, okay? And that might take, 15 minutes, maybe a little less. So by the time warm up and the leg work drills are through, I'm hoping we've done like 20 minutes of practice. So then you got to move pretty fast because your time goes by very, very quickly. Okay. Let me look at my notes here for a second. So now, more often than not, I'll sometimes change it up. We'll do some passing drills beforehand. A lot of times, if I'm going to do some swimming conditioning set, I like to do it before the passing and shooting. The reason being is that if a lot of people are able to shoot and pass fairly well when they're fresh. After you do a difficult swim set, all of a sudden you start getting them passing and their brain's a little foggy, and it's harder to pass and shoot when you're, breathing hard and you're tired. So I usually try to get them to do any swim sets they do before I do passing and shooting. Now, with conditioning for the guys, it's tough. I mean, in 6 weeks, how much conditioning how much do you really want to spend half an hour swimming? I don't. The players don't. Okay. If they, want to put their goggles on and swim up and down, great. But what I normally do is I have some type of water polo skill involved in swim sets. And you can be creative, and you don't have to do large, long distances. You get them moving. An example might be you might do 10 75s. The first 25 is with the ball. Length 2 and length 3 is front crawl, head down or head up, using no walls. Okay. If you have a really good swimmer and they're pushing off the wall, a third of the length is what they're doing off the push of the wall. And you're teaching them to turn properly and to, it's a harder workout for them, especially if they're a good swimmer. So now here's where it gets a little tricky. A lot of times I'll base my teams for the last 10 years. Sometimes I'll have some really good swimmers and I have kids that don't swim so well. They're in pretty good shape, but they're not nearly as fast as other kids. So what I've been doing is I don't necessarily give them an interval time to do it on. I'll give them a set, like I'll say 10 75s, as I use the example, 25 with the ball, and then 50 after. Instead of giving them a time, I'll say, you're taking 20 seconds or 30 seconds rest between each one. So that allows the fast kids who are still getting a 20-second rest, and the slower kids, they're still working as hard, maybe working harder than the fast kids, and they get 20 seconds rest as well. So so everybody's sort of on the same page, and it's easy to explain to them instead of saying you're going on a minute 30 and you're going on a minute 45 or whatever. That kind of complicates things the way I look at it. Okay. As I said a couple of times, all my swim sets have some sort of water polo component to it, whether it's jumping, then swimming, jumping in half, then swimming, or doing something with the ball. I'm really trying to get them tired in like a 15 minutes worth of swimming. Okay, so my goal is to have them, needing a rest, and I'll generally know at the end of the swim set when I say do 50 easy. If they look like they don't really need 50 easy, then I maybe need to challenge them more. So by the time they get finished that swim set, they should be ready to take a rest and do a couple lengths easy to catch the breath. I don't generally do, in a short season like this, I don't do anything longer than hundreds. I mean, in the good old days, you'd have coaches say, okay, you're doing 5 200s on something. I mean, that just takes too much time, and it's, in my viewpoint, it's a little boring putting your goggles on. And in the long season, yeah, it's necessary. But in the short season like this, I don't think that much swimming is going to help you. So that's where I'm on with the swim sets. I do try to do it every day. Okay. I feel that's important. Even in a 6-week season, I think that it helps them by the time they get through those 6 weeks. Those first 2 weeks of conditioning don't do that much for them, but it's building a base for them. Okay. So after they do the swim set, I think passing is so important. Okay. I generally do at least 15 minutes of passing. whether it's in twos, threes, fours, fives, one ball, two balls while they're moving. I don't do a lot of static passing where they just sitting there making a pass. I do a lot of things incorporating into different groups. I try to change it up regularly. I don't have them do pass with the same guy for 10 minutes. I'll do a drill for 4 or 5 minutes, then try to change it up. It might be just a little tweak change, whether they're passing in twos and I want them to do wet passes, or catching the ball across face, or moving, making a pass. Okay. So I try to keep it moving fast so they don't get bored. And they sometimes they don't even realize how much passing they're doing before they get through it. And but in my mind, you can't work on all the strategies of the game unless you're good at passing. Okay. I can go one step further. In the club game, the difference between a good team and a team that's not very experienced is that inexperienced team very often aren't able to pass under pressure. They're not able to make a pass when they have a defensive player on them. So until you can teach those inexperienced players how to pass under pressure, they're going to struggle. Okay, and I see it over and over again. Even if you have a team where you have 2 solid players, but the other 4 players in the water, they get the ball and they can't make a confident pass under pressure. They look like they're nervous. They don't have any confidence. So you got to spend a lot of time teaching them how to pass under pressure. Okay, when we do a lot of that. So, and I'll just add one piece to that. Even if you're a really good shooter, if your teammate can't give you a good pass, it doesn't matter how good shooter you are. So I think passing is overlooked. You can make it fun. You can do a lot of different things, whether you're doing a passing in relays of 3, you can do passing with movement. I never have anybody say to me that we're passing too much, because I might incorporate 4 or 5 different passing drills in that 15 minutes. And you're moving fast, but it keeps their brain engaged and it keeps them working on different skills. And I do it with defensive players as well. So there's a lot of different variations you can do. There's hundreds of drills you can do. I generally have maybe 30 that I like best. I might have 3 of them passing in a straight line where they catch, spin, pass to the end, catch, spin, and then they can do it like just change it up where a wet pass with a backhand, pass to the end, or a wet pass laying out to pass to the end. There's a million different variations you can do just to keep it fresh and moving. Okay. Now, when you come to shooting, everybody loves to stand there and pick up the ball and fire it, but it's a bit of a time-consuming drill. A lot of times even if you're lucky enough to be able to incorporate a drill where you have 3 or 4 people doing something in that shooting drill, there's still the other 8 or 9 players who are sitting there waiting for their turn. So it's difficult to have a lot of shooting where everyone's doing something. A lot of times people are just waiting in line for the next shot, which is sort of a waste of your 2-hour practice. So I don't spend a huge amount of time on shooting. I might have 2 or 3 drills, and then if I'm lucky enough to be able to have a drill where I have 4 players moving at the same time, I think that's a win. I don't like to have watching 12 people standing there watching one guy shoot, and then you get another shot, and before you've done 15 minutes of practice, you've only had 6 shots. Okay, so that's not a good use of time. Now, again, if you have a small team and you only have 12 players in a team, you're going to get more repetition. But if you have a big team and you only have 1 goalie, then you got, a lot of people sitting around doing nothing. I'm not going to go into too much on the shooting. There are a lot of good drills out there. There are a lot of good things you can do. But generally at the club level, I don't think teams win or lose games because of their shooting. I think their other parts of the game are that much more important. But the players love to do it. And, we always have some shooting during every practice. Okay. So you've noticed I've talked about a lot of different things individually. Um, but I haven't talked about game situations yet. But before we talk about game situations, I break practices down into three groups. Okay. My goalies have a different workout. So that's where the book comes in handy. You've written down 15 drills for your team. I'll also have a side page where while the kids are doing a swim set, the goalies are doing their own work. Okay. So if the swim set's 50 minutes, I have maybe 4 drills that the goalies are doing while the kids are doing the swimming. And then they might be warming up each other before they actually do the shooting. Because I don't want to waste the time of having the goalies warming up and while the players are waiting there for the goalies to warm up. So I like to have the goalies doing their legwork and shooting drills with maybe just one goalie or one player. And if you're lucky enough to have an assistant coach, you can warm them up and do some shooting with them. That helps. But if you don't have a good goalie, until you start coaching, you don't realize how very important goalies are. Okay, when I played, goalies, all they did was take the ball out of the net after you scored on it. Once you start coaching, you realize if you have a good goalie, it's a real valuable tool. So make sure that the goalies have their own unique practice, okay? Because their position is very different than everybody else's. And if you're in it for the long term, you can get a kid that's not that experienced. And if they do their own 20 minutes of practice as a goalie, by their junior year, by their senior year, they can be a pretty solid player. Okay, so you have to be organized if you're going to have your players doing drills, your goalies doing drills, and now I think it's super critical to have your 2-meter defender and your 2-meter players doing their own thing. Okay, so I might have half the team shooting on one end, and I might tell my 5 or 6 hole players, let's go back through the lingo here. I'm old, so we used to call it hole, and a lot of teams still do. But I don't just have them go into the game without having any repetition on learning what skills they have. Because I think it's very important for them to have repetition on the 3 or 4 different shots that they might use shooting from the hole. And they need to be so comfortable in it, they need to be able to do it on instinct. Because before they get that ball coming into them, they got to realize where's the defender, what opportunity do I have? What shot do I now have available to me? And if they're still thinking about how to do a backhand or how to turn a player or how to lay out, then they're not going to be successful. So you got to do repetition, ball come in, lay out, turn, backhands, and until they can do it second nature and not have to think about it so much. And that's what I do a lot of that, even without a defender. And then once they get good at that, I might throw a couple defenders on them playing from behind. So they get repetition doing these shots with a defensive player behind them. And then when they get good at that, I'll then throw somebody who's checking them from the front and fronting them. And then the whole player can learn how to work around and get body position and keep it. But until they have those shots, it's sort of no use doing the other steps. Okay, so I wish I had more time for the whole players, because the problem is when the whole players are working on doing their thing, they're missing out on some of the shooting. I think it's more important for your whole players. And at the club level, if you have 2 or 3 kids who can play whole comfortably, that's a huge asset. You don't want to focus on just one. So you always want to be developing kids who can, play that very critical, important position. Okay, so you got your whole players, you got your goalies, you got your workout. And so where does that leave for you, game situations? Yeah, that's why the 2 hours is, I can very easy do an hour and 50 minutes just on doing that before we do game situations at all. And I haven't even talked about scrimmaging yet. Okay, so again, in the 6-week season, very difficult to teach them how to play 4 or 5 different defensive styles of play. I generally try to focus on 2. You could play on your 6 and 5 defense. There's 5 or 6 different ways you can defend. I don't like to give them a little piece of all of those. I try to focus on the two that I think will work best at the club level so that they're comfortable with that. And whether you're working on rotating holes, or you're working on counterattack, or you're working on bringing the ball up the pool, all those game situations take time. And I mean, they're super important. But again, I'll say it again. If your kids can't pass, it's no use working on all these fancy stuff. And if not, I've used the word fancy. That's not really true. They can't pass. They can't, no use having a great hole player if every time the guy try to put the ball in the hole, it's a lousy pass and it's too far away, or it's right at the guy's face, or they can't think about where a good pass is. So you got to have all that in place before you can actually do the game situations. And there's numerous ones of those. Even timeout plays, what to do after you score a goal, or the last minute of the game. All those things are way down the line. Unless you got a really experienced team, you can maybe take some shortcuts on the, shooting and passing and work more on situational play. And you see it at the club level. You see, like when in New England, there's 5 or 6 teams that always have a solid group. They have a very different practice than what we do, because they have a group of maybe 8 or 9 guys who are pretty solid water polo players, and the coach can spend more time. I sometimes tell people that a lot of times I do more time teaching than coaching. So what I mean by that is I spend a lot of time teaching them basic skills, how to do it right, how to do it wrong. Some things I'm more particular than others. I mean, in the way I teach water polo backstroke is not critical that they do it exactly the way I want to. Whereas when it comes to having a good water polo start, I'm more detail orientated on that. So you got to pick your spots as well. And the big one is, passing under pressure. You got to have confidence to be able to make that pass with a good defender on you. I can't stress that enough. Let's see. Okay, let's talk about the fun stuff, which everyone loves, scrimmaging. During the beginning of the season, I think it's more important to do some of the other stuff. It's always nice to have maybe one day a week where you scrimmage for an hour. But again, let's say you scrimmage for 45 minutes. A lot of the times, those goalies aren't getting nearly as much work during a scrimmage as they are doing shooting drills, doing their own leg work. They're getting maybe a shot every couple minutes, perhaps, if the defense is solid. So scrimmage has its place. I like to have longer scrimmages as the season goes on. And I also look at how my team is doing in the first tournament and the second tournament. If I feel that their skills are pretty good, but some of them are lacking in game experience, I think scrimmaging is fantastic. I'm a big believer on scrimmage with instruction. I do have times where I'll just let them play, and if they make 15 mistakes, I just let them play. But that doesn't happen that often. I like to referee as I'm scrimmaging. So if I see something really that I think needs a discussion, I'll stop the scrimmage and explain it to them then, what we're looking for, what they could maybe do better, opportunities that might create, from that scrimmage. So I call it a controlled scrimmage. And the players are pretty receptive to it. And then I might do some 6-on-5 if we have time. And I'll, usually, again, as I said, I usually have 2 or 3 defenses that I prefer. And I'll teach them, like for the first weekend, it's difficult to have your team go from one defense to another defense in a quarter. So that first weekend, I really stress, I try to play one way, and then I build on that. And then I also know what the other teams are doing offensively and defense. So if I'm playing a team where they have 2 guys who are doing all the shooting on extra man, then I might teach them how to play defense where taking those 2 guys away. So it depends on what you're